I'm donning two avatars. One is, of course, as a fellow of Center for Policy Research, and as the second is a research group within the Center for Policy Research, which does particular work on accessing data for service delivery. So I think for the center, open data is not limited to data in terms of just numbers. I think it's related much more to just open research practices, making available research standards, making available metadata, citations properly, open access to journal articles as much as possible. And I think at CPR we've been trying to do that. It's expensive. It's not cheap. Even just making journal articles open access is costly, and that is a challenge. And I think one of the challenges which we can actually go into a little later is that most research institutions aren't really designed to be open. And partly it's a funding constraint, partly it's a technical know-how constraint, but that's kind of what openness means for CPR, and we've been trying to do that to the best of our ability. Still not, I won't say we're perfect and nowhere near, but that's kind of how I would identify it. But specifically for the accountability initiative, what we've been doing is we've been trying to understand service delivery and implementation of a large number of public welfare schemes. And often most of these are government-run schemes, and usually what that entails is either collecting data that doesn't publicly exist already, so through primary surveys, data at the last mile. So you was mentioning that a lot of data is available, but often not the disaggregated data isn't publicly available. It's available to government, hopefully, but it's not always easy to access for citizens. So sometimes we go out and collect it. And what's fascinating is that one of the projects that we had done was for ministry, where they asked us to go and collect this data. And my initial question was exactly this. This is government data, you should already have access to it. And it was interesting, their response, which was that, yes, we do, but we have access to one version of it. And as a third-party organization that is not part of government, going out and collecting it, you possibly will be able to get more nuances, but also, as they said, probably the truth, whatever the truth is. And the second part of what we do in terms of open data is taking data that's already available and just simplifying it. So finding ways to communicate the same information so that someone else could understand it better. And that could mean taking the scanned Excels. It's fascinating how many times you get a scanned Excel document and unscanning it, as in re-entering it, or it could mean actually finding the information intermediaries like journalists and other researchers. So simplifying it so that other people can also use it and understand it better.
Just a quick follow-up on a couple of things you mentioned, and we in 3IE we're having some of the same insights about, for example, making journal articles open access it's costly, etc. As you said. First of all, do you find that funders are sort of interested and willing to provide funds for making them publicly available? And second, you mentioned that there's also technical constraints, so I'd be just interested in what exactly you were referring to. And then maybe if you don't mind saying a bit more about, what's your interpretation of why they were saying that you would get the more truthful data and why people thought so.
Sure. So regarding the funding community, I think it's evolving. I don't think that all funders are necessarily open to open data. It also depends on the kind of avatar that you as a research organization is doing. We have a lot of groups that are kind of in between a research organization or a think tank or a consultancy organization. I think consultancy organizations have a tough time. Every time we have worked with government to do a project for government, public data suddenly becomes no longer shareable, and that's something that we struggle with as well. And as part of a research organization, it's really frustrating to not be able to publish the research that you have done because the audience or the person you've done it for isn't open necessarily to publishing it. I think I was just speaking with someone just saying that I think the Transparency and Accountability Initiative in the West, which is trying to get donors together, is having this conversation right now. And so they've got a group of funders together. They're regularly talking about the role that donors can play in ensuring open data, or ensuring transparency and accountability. But I think in India, it's still in the nascent stages. And possibly it also depends a little bit, and we've seen this depending on who the funder is, their relationship within India, their relationship with government. Regarding technical know-how, I think the classical example is a personal example. Our tagline is almost strengthening transparency and accountability. So one of the first things that we had tried to do was all the data sets that we collect, which are mostly public data, we just organize them and make them more user-friendly. We try to just put them on our website. And it resulted in this, I like this term, but it resulted in a data graveyard. Because we hadn't really thought through who would use it and how. It became a data dump. And that's kind of, in some ways, unfortunately, and I say this time and again, India is a country that has a lot of data and public, government, open data, but often it becomes a data graveyard. You have so much data that it's just hard to sift through. It's hard to understand. It's hard to just pull out that information that you specifically need, because we don't have the data standards. We don't necessarily have the metadata out either. And so I think the technical know-how of just part of it is technology, but I don't think that technology is the only answer, because technology could be the help from the architecture, but equally important is thinking through the demands of data. Mm-hmm. Who's demanding, for what purpose, to some degree, and what would be useful to put out. What was your last question? The ministry. I think, so we file a lot of RTIs and right to information, Right to Information Act, right to information. Letters. What are the we file the act. The request. Anyway, the request. Thank you. Often it's astounding, but in some ways also interesting, is that often the responses we get, and I'm taking it at face value, is that at the union government level, the national level, they don't necessarily have collated data of different states. And partly it's part of India is a decentralized country, there's devolution, every state has a lot of flexibility in implementation. Implementation rests with the states. But what we've also seen, because we've been tracking actually the data that exists right from when it's collected upwards, is that as it is going upwards, there is some amount of collation that happens, but in the absence of proper both capacity but data standards as well, in that collation things get lost, misinterpreted. You literally have data that is lost because of passwords being lost. You don't have proper handover practices, and so as a result of it, I guess the question is, what is the incentive? And that is often unclear or poorly formed. And so as a result of it, the national government doesn't always believe the data that it gets even from the ground.